Every few weeks I like to take some of Marvel Snap's most forgotten cards, the ones nobody's playing, sitting at the bottom of the play rate charts, and ask a simple question: what would it take to actually make them good? Now, in my previous videos I have done cards that everybody owns, however with this one I'm going to take a look at the Series 5 cards. These ones are generally newer and not everybody will own them, but I think they're cards that are genuinely crying out for a rework right now. I have 8 of them for you today. Some of them just need a slight number tweak, some of them need a full rethink, and a couple of these might be a little too strong, but after last time, I'm honestly leaning into that. So first off, I'm going to start with a requested one that is a card that I genuinely love already as it is. However, it is very weak with a 0.2% play rate and a 46.7% win rate. This is Dragon of the Moon. Now, Dragon of the Moon is an interesting card. However, currently, it's really clunky. Taking 1 power from your opponent's hand and giving it to itself feels okay, but then you're not always guaranteed to even get any power from your opponent's card. So if they had like 1 card, it's a 3/6 and then possibly a 3/7 if they play that card. And of course you can take it from your own hand and Luke Cage, but now Luke Cage has been nerfed. I mean, it's a nerf in this instance anyway. And I think Dragon of the Moon then needs to have something worthwhile. So I'm changing it to a 3/2, steal 2 power from all even cost cards in all hands. That way, now even if your opponent only has 1 card, it's still getting 2 power, effectively becoming a 3/6. But if there's more than 1 card or you have cards in your own hand, it can actually become quite a decently sized card. And then I think at that point you start looking at actually adding even cost cards to your own hand that you will then just Luke Cage to remove the negative effect, and it can then become a pretty decent sized card. If we think about it, it was a 3/5 before, and if you had 4 cards in your hand and your opponent had 2, that's 6, it became a 3/11. It's a pretty good card, but that's also high rolling it. Now, even if you have 3 cards in your own hand, that's going to become a 3/8. If your opponent has more, 3/10, 3/12, you see where I'm going. It can become a pretty insane card, and the negative power on your opponent's side isn't anything to scoff at. As I said with this video, I'm leaning into making them strong, because people commented on the last one that I tended to lean in towards the weaker side of things. However, I do think because of the unreliability of a card like this, it deserves to have pretty high roll. Even if the low rolls are now even lower than before, it allows consistency to be higher. So next up we have what could possibly be a controversial one, but one I'm pretty happy with. It's Caiera. Now, I mentioned before that Caiera's main problem is that it's a 3-drop, and it's a bit awkward to play in those decks. And then I said, if it was a 1-drop, would it be too overpowered? And I feel like it probably would, because then it just synergizes with everything else in the deck alongside protecting itself and all the other 1-drop cards. I think a rework might be more necessary for the card. So I've made her into a 2/1, and I've removed her ability to protect 6-drops. Ongoing, your 1-cost cards can't be destroyed, and gain +1 power for each card protected. So what this means is, I've removed the 6-drop thing, mainly because Shang-Chi isn't really that big in the meta right now. But if this card becomes strong, Shang-Chi's just going to not be played, right? So I at least want to leave that space in the meta for Shang-Chi to have some viability. Caiera was very rarely protecting 6-drops anyway, even if it was just like not Infinity Ultron, but regular Ultron in a Zoo deck, or if it was just like a random 6-drop card you had in a deck with a bunch of 1-drops. Most of the time she's protecting 1-drop cards, right? Killmonger is more prevalent. So now, she's not only protecting your 1-drop cards, and she's a 2/1, so she's cheaper. Her power is lower, but if you have protected 1-drop cards, her ongoing is going to be higher. So she's a bit like Goliath, but for Zoo. And I feel like Zoo could do with a card like that. Maybe it will be a card that gets printed eventually. But for now, I'm adding it onto Caiera, because it isn't as straight up as like gain +1 power for each 1-drop card. The cards have to be protected. Meaning also, if you were to play armor in the deck, all those cards that armor were protecting, Caiera would also get power from. Kind of adding a small mini archetype. I like to do that in these kind of videos, however today it's not really as obvious. I've not got like a bunch of cards that synergize together, but that could be a possibility, and she's set in 0.6% of decks, which isn't too bad. I think it's the highest play rate from all of these cards right now. However, I think she needs something a little more. She does have a 49.8% win rate as well, so a little below average, but yeah, let me know what you think about that. So next up we have a pretty simple change, I suppose. It's Emperor Hulkling. He's in 0.4% of decks, and honestly I've not seen this card in forever, so I don't know what decks he's in. And a 46.7% win rate, which, same as Dragon of the Moon, it's kind of rough. Now, with Emperor Hulkling, it's difficult when I came to change this card, because I could add text to it, right? But the problem is when you add text to it, its text gets replaced at the start of the game. So I was considering activate, reroll, or things like this. However, the text would get replaced. I could go around saying maybe it doesn't replace that part or whatever, but I think at that point it becomes too strong, because what if you get it into like an Arnim Zola, you play it and you activate to re-roll it? You could get Destroyer, I suppose, which still wouldn't make it great. However, I'm jumping into a point that I haven't actually changed. I had then considered reducing its cost. However, it's thematically a 6-drop because of all the Hulks being 6-drops, right? So it just basically, I landed on making it a 6/14, the same as Hulk. Kind of a boring change, I know, but this card doesn't have very many levers to change. And seeing as it's currently sitting behind what Hulk is, it could do with those stats. And I do think with that change, it probably would see play as well. But yeah, a fairly simple one there. Next up, I have Thunderbolt Thaddeus Ross with a 0.1% of decks and a 48.5% win rate. This card is just nowhere, really. Even in decks where you're wanting to draw big cards, you don't really play that many of them, so you're comfortable just waiting until you draw like 1 or 2 that you can play. So I've changed Thunderbolt Thaddeus Ross to a 2/1. End of turn, if your opponent has unspent energy, draw a card with 8+ power and gain power equal to their unspent energy. So now, I'm lowering the ceiling a little bit so you can draw those 8 and 9 power cards. I thought that was okay because there's not really that many 8 or 9 power cards in the game. It's like Wilson Fisk, Ozymandias, then you've got things like Enchantress and Blink, and maybe you want to draw those, but again, the problem with this card is always that it's so inconsistent because you never know if your opponent's ever going to float energy the entire game. That's why I don't want to make its ability consistent, I want to make when it hits more consistent. And it becomes like a little bit of a mild counter towards Haivo in a way, where if they float for like an Infinite or a She-Hulk or something, you're then getting 5 power onto the card, which is a nice little boost, and honestly I think its play rate would go up for that reason. It would still be slightly clunky. The alternative that I had considered was making it so that if your opponent has unspent energy, draw a card. Otherwise, +1 power. Which is more in line with Adam Warlock, but then it's just too similar to Adam Warlock, and I start thinking, well, why wouldn't we just run Adam Warlock, you know? So I wanted to add a little bit of that balance in there. Then we have Frankie Rainova. This is a card that I actually quite liked. I ran a deck with it a few times where you would buff the cards and then on the last turn play like an Odin on top of a Namora and then buff, and then it gets doubled. And the problem is it's in 0.1% of decks. It does have a slightly above positive win rate. This is one I'm a little bit scared of. I've made it into a 3/4, so it costs a little bit more. I had considered making it a 2/4 instead. But 3/4 I think fits based off what I'm about to propose. When you play a 6+ card, double this card's power. So at first you might not see that there's any change until you realize that now it basically means whenever you play a 6+ card. So I changed it to 6+ because before it was just 6, and it was one of those cards that sort of missed that change when they made things like +6 or lower than 3 cost cards or higher than 4 cost cards, that sort of thing, to encompass 0 cost and like 7 and 8 cost cards. Frankie now encompasses that, but it can double multiple times. I start thinking, is 3/4 too big? But then if you think about Human Torch, it's a 3/3, right? In a move deck, it gets bounced around a whole bunch of times. So 3/4 for Frankie Ray, if you play 1 card, it becomes a 3/8, which is like premium stats, but like a lot of cards sit around there these days. Nobody's really going to scoff at it, but as a 2/6 where she was before, which is premium 2-drop stats, she still wasn't good. So therefore, I allowed for the ability to go off again. Now, she'd probably be played in ramp decks. The reason I put her as a 3-drop was because if she was a 2-drop, she would just be stepping all over Chamber's toes. At a 3-drop, she kind of messes with what ramp wants to do with the Electro Blink style lines. Otherwise, it would be as simple as Frankie Ray, get extra energy, play 6-drop, and you then just casually have a 3-16. But I think the beauty of allowing her to go off twice is that it's actually more difficult to play 2 6-drop cards in a game, unless you're playing something like ramp where you're getting extra energy, right? A 3-16. Does that seem too strong? Possibly. However, a way to make that weaker would be a 3-3, in which case then becomes a 3-12 at 2 6-drop plays. It's a fine line, deciding which one works better, but I think 3-4, seeing as I'm buffing these cards, is probably where I'm going to sit her at for now. Then we have an interesting one with White Widow. So White Widow is in 0.4% of decks and has a 45.7% win rate. I think this might be one of the lowest percent win rate cards in the game. Because you're playing a 2-2 body where the ability basically just gets removed, it hardly ever hinders the opponent, right? So I've changed the card. It could be a little bit irritating as a heads up, but let's see. It's a 2-3 with on reveal, fill your opponent's side of this location with Widow's Kisses. So now you're not just putting one there, you're filling their side, and I've changed it to a 0-0, destroy this when the location is full. So a bit like how the ice cube works, if the location is full, one of them will get destroyed. And then the next turn, if it's full again, the next one will get destroyed. Effectively limiting the opponent's location to only being able to play one card there a turn. Which feels very strong, and then sort of counters the like Angela Kitty Pryde style lanes. It also counters Brood, which is another nice use for it. If you know the opponent's going to play a Brood there, you just play White Widow, fill their location, so they play Brood and just Brood goes off, its on reveal doesn't do anything. I think then it actually has some uses and works as sort of like a mild tech card in a way. I put them as 0-0 because I felt like if it was 0-1 or whatever, it might even start leaning on being too strong because the opponent has to play a card there every turn to remove the negative effect. But I could see arguments for making them a 0-1 still. However, I do think that would definitely make the card see more play. And it's a 2-3, so its stats have gone up slightly. Could be a slightly irritating one, as I say, to play against, but definitely going to see play. Then we have a card that has sort of stumped me for a while, Elixir. So Elixir has stumped me because they added Archangel to the game, and Archangel is like a 2-4 that revives a card with 5 power. Its only downside is that it doesn't specify which card is being revived, which makes it clunky. Elixir has sat even lower than this, and it's a 2-3 that revives one card from last turn, which allows it to be played in combo decks, but people just run Adamantium Infusion now, so it's like, why would you ever really want to run Elixir? Adamantium Infusion is going to double a card's power. Now, I toyed around with the idea of giving Elixir, when it revives a card, give it power, right? A bit like Archangel, but then I'm just thinking, those cards are too similar. You can't make it like Archangel, you can't make it like Phoenix Force, you can't make it like Adamantium Infusion. So I decided to change it a little bit. I made it a 2-4, because I believe it probably deserves those stats. On reveal, all of your cards destroyed last turn get revived here. Effectively meaning, if you Venom, like, a Sage and, I don't know, Wolfsbane, just for argument's sake. When you play Elixir next turn, it brings both of those back on that location, as opposed to one that you don't know what it's going to give. And I think it's a small change, because a lot of the time people were destroying Black Panthers and bringing it back on Elixir's location, which again, you just use Adamantium Infusion now. However, it gives it more utility in a slightly different style deck, where you're wanting to play a bunch of smaller on-reveals that have abilities, then play Elixir to bring them all back once they've been destroyed. Let me know what you think about this one. Probably on the weaker end of my changes, but I still think it could actually allow it to see more play. And lastly, I have Selene Horseman. So the Selene Horseman is a card I really wanted to like. It was supporting an archetype that needed it, but it just really wasn't it. It has 0.1% play rate and a 47% win rate, and honestly, it's a little bit disappointing. Its stats feel like it could be decently high, but just because its ability is so costly, it needs to have an ability that matches it. Now, if we look at the horsemen that work, we look at Gambit, for example. Gambit works so well because its ability isn't super tricky to get off. Sort of like playing 3 cards with no abilities is. But its payoff is so much better because you're not always getting that ability every single game, but when you do, it needs to feel impactful, right? Gambit is on the high end of being impactful, I understand that, he's quite strong. So if we look at Storm, also quite strong. Storm Horseman of Famine, yeah. I believe that's right, ignore me if I'm wrong. She gives 2 costs to everything in that location and your entire hand. That's an insane thing, especially for just saying you pretty much just have to skip the first 2 turns, which her decks want to do anyway, so you don't need to do much other than play the game. I think that Selene Horseman falls into that category. My proposed change for her is an interesting one. Now, let me just lay it out and I'll tell you why. So I'm making her a 4/3, and the same objective, have 3 cards with no abilities in play, but the payoff is now steal 7 power from an enemy card here and split it between your cards with no abilities. So this leads her closer into the sort of like Caliban. Caliban deals -7 damage, right? Selene will do the same, similar to Omega Sentinel. That's quite a strong ability, but because those things can go off multiple times, Selene needed more. So now she's splitting that 7 power between your cards with no abilities. Now the interesting thing about that is, it's hard to make it exponential, because you can't just play like Sebastian Shaw or these other things where you're splitting the power between them. Kind of like you can with Kahori, for example. However, Selene always guarantees 7 splits of power, whereas Kahori doesn't. It could border on being strong, but as I say, because it's giving it to cards with no abilities, that by default means the only way you can really make more use out of that is playing something like Venus. Now Venus, Selene, Iron Patriot, then last turn play Ultron, for example. That's pretty strong. And I think that is about the power level that most decks are at these days. So I genuinely think that if Selene had an ability like that, she would probably be able to compete. And then we start looking at, what if we had Caiera in that deck as well? Caiera protects all those 1-drops, and then... So that's 3 card slots. Caiera is the 4th card slot, meaning you would have 8 drones, making Caiera a 2/9. She's a 2/9. She protects your 1-drops. You have Iron Patriot, then buffing all those 1-drops. Selene stealing power from something, giving buffs out, and I guess you would then also have Venus to last play turn on Ultron. Pretty strong. I think those 2 card changes make that deck pretty strong and actually pretty compelling for people. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. I think the Selene one is one that I'm more happy with. I'm very happy with the Caiera one. Dragon of the Moon is a bit hit and miss. Emperor Hulkling is a simple change. Thunderbolt Thaddeus Ross. I think this could be decent now. Frankie Ray Nova is one that scares me a little bit. White Widow. Comfortable with this one. I think that it could work as sort of like a mild tech card and actually be usable. Elixir could now see play. I do think so. And Selene, as I said, I've got a whole deck there built up around her that I think could be good. I sort of want to play it right now, except it doesn't exist, sadly, so I can't play it. But yeah, let me know what you guys think about all of these cards. And if you did enjoy the video, drop a like and a subscribe, and it would mean the world to me. I know that's like my catchphrase at this point, but I've seen the channel growing a lot recently. You guys have been loving the editing I did on the zombie video, and I had a lot of fun with that. Let me know if you guys want to see more videos like that, and I'll keep an eye out for when I have extra time to pour into the channel. And yeah, thank you for watching, guys. Let me know if you have any other cards you would like me to cover. I have a couple more lined up and a couple more video ideas. So yeah, thanks in advance, and I'll speak to you all next time.